Hello everyone, and welcome to what appears to be the greatest and probably the most precise game played in the candidates so far. We have Sergei Karjakin with the white pieces against Fabiano Caruana, the tournament leader. Going into this game, this is round 12 of the candidates. Caruana has 7 points and Sergei Karjakin has 6 points, so he's a point behind. And if he wins this game, he will catch up to Fabiano, and he will share the lead in the tournament, basically. So before we start this game, I only have one photo of this round. It's a photo of Sergei Karjakin here. Here we can enjoy it in full screen. The photo is a bit weird, but Karjakin always looks a bit weird on photos. But you know, as they say, it's better to be weird on photos than over the board. Now, for some reason, Nikki didn't get a photo of Fabi. For some reason, maybe he was late for the game, I have no idea. But I did update the profile photos of the players here on the left side of the board, so there's a nice photo of Fabi there. So let's see the game. Karjakin goes for e4, as he is probably the most precise e4 player in this field. And we have e5. By going e4, he challenges Fabiano to his Petrov defense, as Fabiano played the Petrov defense against anyone who challenged him with e4. And he hasn't lost a single game yet, so definitely a reasonable thing to do. Knight to f3, knight to f6, knight captures on e5, d6, knight to f3, this is the classical variation. Knight captures on e4, and now knight to c3, my favorite line against the Petrov. Knight captures on c3, d captures on c3, and now knight to c6. Bishop to e3, we have bishop to e7, queen to d2, preparing queenside castle. Bishop to e6, and here we do have queenside castle. And Caruana plays queen to d7. Here, bishop captures on a2 does condemn this bishop to be captured. But it's also a playable line, but since Karjakin allows this, after you capture here, of course you will play b3. You want to trap the bishop with king to b2, but then a5, and after king to b2, a4, and black will get a reasonable attack for this bishop. King captures, now pawn captures on b3. King has to capture on b3, and now rook to a5. Preparing queen to a8, you have to go back, queen to a8, and now rook to b1, making room for the king to escape. And although it does appear like black achieved something, but he doesn't fully have compensation. So Sergei was obviously very prepared for this. So after this queenside castle, queen to d7, and now a3, not allowing the pawn to be captured anymore. h6, knight to d4, knight captures, bishop captures, and here rook to g8. He doesn't want to allow this rook to stay on h8 since the bishop is on d4. So rook to g8, maybe preparing to push g5, f5 in the future, obviously announcing that he will indeed castle queenside. Bishop to e2, we have c5 now, bishop back to e3, and now d5. f4, preventing black from executing g5 immediately, preparing bishop to f3. Caruana castles queenside here, and here we have bishop to f3. And here, if Fabi went f5, this does seem to lock the position down, and you know, everything stays the same. Everything is fine on the board. The game continues. But I believe here Fabi really got scared of actually winning the candidates, and he played bishop to g4 with the idea of exchanging pieces. But here, I believe Karjakin smelled blood, as he isn't interested in trading pieces. He immediately played bishop captures on d5. He decided to sacrifice the exchange, here the rook on d1. So you do have to capture it now. Bishop captures, rook captures, and now getting the queen out of the d file, queen to c7, and now c4. So Karjakin grabbed a pawn. He's down the exchange, but that's a monster bishop on d5. Black no longer has a light square bishop. He still has the bishop pair, and it's hard to say if those rooks will be able to get any action in this game. So rook g to e8. We have queen to f2. Now b6, more protection to the c5 pawn. g4. We have bishop to f6, and now king to b1. Rook to d7. Rook to d3. g5 now, and here king to a2. Rook e to e7, and here queen to f3. King to d8, and This is actually one of the critical moments in the game. King to d8 is not the most precise way to go. Here Karjakin played bishop to d2, and bishop to d2 is an excellent move. Here he also had the opportunity, which I'm sure he decided wasn't worth going into, to play f captures on g5. Because after bishop captures, h captures, you have bishop to c6. Now, of course, threatening to win back your exchange. And after rook captures on d3, queen captures on d3. This is with check. You have to move the king. King to c8 only move, and now you have queen to f5 check. Of course, you have to move the king to b8, and now queen captures on g5. And here, of course, if black captures black captures the bishop, you capture the rook on a7. But here you would have these two very strong pawns. The h-pawn is a passed pawn, and it would be very hard for black to counter this. Queen to e5, offering a trade of queens, but now queen g8 check. King moves, queen to a8, and after king moves, now bishop to d5. Guarding all the squares around the black king, and it's hard to say if black could hold this. But instead of this forcing variation, Karjakin went for a non-forcing variation, but that will be just as forcing in the end. Here he played bishop to d2, and it seems like a weird move to play, but not really. Karjakin's plan is queen to f1, making room for the rook, then rook to h3, and then trying to infiltrate Fabi from behind. So we have king to c8, and now queen to f1. And it's interesting, queen to h3 with the same idea of infiltrating with the queen does not work. Because after queen to h3, g captures on f4 and queen captures on h6, you have bishop to e5. And now this queen to f8 check doesn't work. You can simply block this, queen to d8, and now bishop to b7. With the idea of winning back the exchange, is actually favorable for black. So king can simply capture it. Queen captures, rook captures, and after rook captures on d8, you do have, you want a pawn here, and it seems like you're better off here, but the passed f-pawn is extremely dangerous, as you can't attack it from behind because the f-pawn is doubled. So after something like king to c6, king to b3, now f3, rook to d3, stopping the pawn, but now rook to d7. And if white trades rooks here, then the f-pawn will be too strong. So here white would have to capture, and black would win a piece here. Rook captures on h1, and it's hard to say. Maybe white could actually hold this, but probably not. So Karjakin calculates precisely that queen to h3 doesn't work. He plays queen to f1, makes room for rook to h3. So rook to d6, and now not immediately rook to h3. First he plays f captures on g5. Bishop captures on g5, and now queen to f5 check. We have rook d to d7. Now bishop captures on g5, h captures on g5, and queen captures on g5. Here Fabiano plays queen to e5. He offers a trade of queens. It'd be excellent if there was time to actually capture the h2 pawn. But if queen captures on h2, then you get queen to g8 check, king c7, and after queen to a8, black is simply doomed. There's really nothing for you to play. a5, g5 is coming. g5 is a very much needed move that it's easy to find if you try to see what black is trying to do. Black would definitely try to defend it with f6, preventing this pawn from being pushed forward, so g5 would be a must-play move. After queen to e5, now bishop to b7, rook to e8, but now rook captures, king captures, and bishop to c6 check. King moves, and queen captures on e8, and it's all over. Queen captures, bishop captures, you're up a piece, you're winning this game. So, after this queen to g5 move, there is no time for Fabi to actually capture the h2 pawn. He played queen to e5, and now comes queen to h6. It's interesting, now queen to g8 with the same idea doesn't work. Of course, queen is on e5, you can simply block this with the rook. So, after this queen to e5, now comes queen to h6. King to d8, and another questionable move, because this gives white a perfect opportunity to play this g5 move, which Fabio obviously missed. If there wasn't for this g5 move, black could have this excellent resource of playing f6. Then there's no longer g5, and it's not that easy to push the h-pawn. Now that this pawn is in g5, you can no longer push the f-pawn, because then g6 is coming. So, unfortunately, for example, if Karjakin decided to push h4 here, thinking that it's all the same, then f6, and it's not that easy to push those pawns anymore. But okay, king to d8, now g5, and now queen to d6, again offering a trade of queens. Now comes queen to h8 check, and now rook to e8. King to c7, of course, doesn't work. It's the same idea. Queen comes to a8 and black falls apart. So after queen to h8 check, rook to e8 blocking, and now queen to h4. Threatening, of course, all sorts of discoveries here. We have queen to g6 blocking this, and now queen to g4. Queen to g4 threatening so many nasty tactics. One of them being, of course, queen captures on d7. That's not available at the moment, but at some point it might be. For example, first you would have to move the rook, for example, to d2, because after you capture the rook on d7, king captures, then you want to capture bishop to f7 check, win the queen, and win the game. First, rook to e5 by Fabi. Now, this idea immediately isn't possible due to the variation I just explained. Bishop captures on f7 does not win the game because you have queen captures on d3, c captures, and rook captures on g5. If black didn't have time to capture this one pawn, then probably it would be winning, but now it's not. So after rook to e5, simply h4, guarding that pawn, so now this actually is a threat. King to e7, getting out of the way, but now not even playing queen captures on d7, but rook to d2. First getting the rook out of the way, now the queen will no longer be able to capture the rook on d3. So b5 here, but now comes bishop captures on f7 immediately, attacking the queen with a double attack on the rook on d7. Queen to f5, blocking, and now rook captures on d7. King captures, and here it's again a very not complicated position, but you could enter some complications with queen to d1. Karjakin probably saw that queen to d1 is the strongest move, but he decided to play queen captures on f5 because this is simply a forced win. Rook captures on f5, and now g6. And the idea here is, okay, Fabiano is still up the exchange, but this bishop on f7 is a beautiful piece. It will constantly be guarding the c4 pawn, and white doesn't mind. The rook will pick up the h4 pawn, but after this captures on b5 and all of the pawns are being pushed on the queen side, this is simply unstoppable. So king to e7 was played. Now comes c captures on b5, rook to h5, c4 now, rook captures on h4, now a4 is coming, rook to g4, a5 now, king to d6, the king has to go to the queen side now to help out with the defense, a6, king to c7, and king to b3, and after Sergei played king to b3, this was move 48, it was in this position that Fabiano Caruana resigned the game. So first loss in the tournament for Fabiano Caruana, and Sergei Karjakin now has 7 points out of 12, same as the tournament leader so far, Fabiano Caruana. And I checked the main criteria for the tiebreaks is their encounter. So because Karjakin beat Caruana, if at the end of the tournament they have, for example, both of them will have maybe 9 points, then it will mean Karjakin is the winner because he wins in the main criteria. Here after king to b3, the win is completely obvious. White will simply waltz his king all the way up to f6 and then push g7 and promote this pawn to a queen. Black has to play something, then simply king c3, rook can check, king d2, and after rook checks, you don't have to protect the b2 pawn, you simply play king to e3. Now if rook captures pawn, you simply play g7 and the pawn is unstoppable. So you have to keep an eye on the g pawn, but now the king simply goes up the board, you attack the rook, rook goes back, king f5, check, king here, you simply have to protect the pawn, now comes king to f6, and now it's all over. You simply push the pawn and win the game. So yeah, it was at this point, move 48, king b3, we can look at a photo of Sergei another time. Here he is, the monster of the tournament, who started off with -2 and then had like the best second half of the tournament like in ever. And it's a similar story than like what happened in the previous candidates tournament. Fabiano was also having a nice streak, and then nearing the end of the tournament, Karjakin simply started winning games, and Fabiano got either scared of winning or or I don't know, maybe it's just that Sergey has the best nerves out of all of them. And it's not that like I'm too happy that Sergey is now in the lead, but I did say Sergey would win the candidates before the candidates even started, so it does make me a little bit happy. So yeah, I'm just gonna say it. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I don't have the final standings for you as there are some games still being played, but I will show you at least another game. The Ding Mamedyarov game is also very excellent, so I will show you that one and include the final standings and the pairings for round 13. So yeah, that's the game. Once again, thank you, Nikki, for the photos, or in this case, one photo of this round. For those of you who maybe don't know, she's a photographer. She's at the candidates tournament every day, and usually we do get some nice photos. Today we got only one, but we can't really complain. As usual, all of the links to her social media are in the description below. If you enjoy chess photography, feel free to follow her work. And yeah, as usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with another game from the 2018 Candidates Tournament. Thank you all.